In this video, we're going to go over argument as a mode of writing and some of the best approaches for making an argument. So argument is a type of persuasion. Persuasion is not necessarily always argument. And persuasion is one of the main purposes of communicating. The big three are to persuade, to inform, and or to entertain. An argument is a type of persuasion. And what makes it different than just trying to persuade somebody to buy something, for example, like all good marketing would do, is that you are looking at an issue or a topic that has at least two sides, so that there are people that disagree with each other and that there will be some people for and some people against something, if not multiple other sides as well. And when you're trying to create an argument, you need it to be credible in order to persuade your reader. And what readers are looking for is timely information, so it has to be current, relevant information, the most up-to-date that you can get. If it's 2021, you don't want to look for information on a topic that's happening now. For example, children being held at the border for immigration status issues. You wouldn't want to go back to 2014. While that was still a topic back then, a lot has changed, including policies, the way things are done, leadership, all of that. So you always want to make sure you have the most timely information for your topic. Make sure that the information is trustworthy and it's from a credible source. So you don't want it from Bob down the street. You want to make sure that this is correct, accurate information, something you can trust. And going with a published, reviewed source of information makes it easier for you to distinguish that. And again, the journal article is kind of that gold standard where it goes through the peer review process, where writers submit their article, say, hey, I think this is useful information for the field, I want to get this published. And then the editors of the journal will send it out for review to peers within that field who have expertise in that area. And those people, usually two or more, will review it and say, yep, this is good, publish it. Or no, this is close, but it needs revision before it can be published. Or just a solid no, this should not be published. And you want to make sure that you develop an argument that's well developed, has enough points, and that they're solid points of information, solid reasons to convince your reader to agree with you. And make sure that any information you're pulling from your sources is relevant and persuasive to the point you're making and overall to your topic. What readers don't want, there's a lot, but we're going to focus on two things here. First of all, if it's off topic or irrelevant, points in support to the topic, readers don't tolerate that very well, and this can actually make them walk away from a document. So you need to make sure that you're staying on point, that it's relevant, on topic, and actually helping support the argument that you're trying to make. And one way that that sometimes doesn't happen is with the use of logical fallacies, which sometimes seem convincing in the moment or when you're not thinking about it very deeply, but then you look back and you're like, wow, that was really a weak point or a weak argument. And that's because logical fallacies are errors in reasoning. They are mistakes that can happen that, again, can look okay on the surface, and so people sometimes use them because it will convince people who are not paying attention or who are not thinking deeply about the issue. It'll convince them quickly. So a few of them are listed here. There's more available in an exercise on D2L if you want to go and explore them. There are a lot because there's a lot of ways that we try to confuse people and take advantage of people with communication. So these are some of the more common ones. First one, post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's Latin for if this, then this. And it means that basically there is an error that you're saying because of this thing, this other thing happened. So for example, because night follows day, day causes night, which is not a true statement, right? Like that night comes around has nothing to do with day. It has to do with, of course, the sun and the position in the sky and all that. Hasty generalization is to draw a conclusion about a group that is based on insufficient evidence. It can also be based on a situation that has insufficient evidence. Similar to overgeneralization, which is where you make such a high level generalization about someone or something that it no longer really applies. Non sequitur, again, Latin term here. It means a conclusion that does not follow from the premise, so very similar to the post hoc ergo propter hoc. So not necessarily causality that you're looking at here, but again, it's like this thing does not necessarily follow this other thing that you said. So for example, I volunteered this summer, so now I'm going to medical school. Well, okay, what does volunteering this summer have to do with medical school? So if you had more specific information, perhaps it would work. So for example, if you said I volunteered overseas and assisted with the medical treatment of refugees, which interested me, so now I'm interested in going to medical school. Okay, well that makes sense. But you got to make sure that the one thing links up with and follows the next thing. An ad hominem attack means that you are making an irrelevant attack on a person rather than dealing with the actual issue. And so you see this in politics a lot, that they'll say, okay, this is the issue we're talking about, and then they start attacking each other as people versus the actual issue. And then lastly, either or fallacy. This is saying that there's only two options here, and you need to take one of them, right? And it's a false choice. Dichotomy is another term for this. And usually there are many more options, but the person who's arguing it narrows it down inappropriately to just two to try to force the listener or reader to make a choice. So this evidence that you're going to provide, it is one of the best ways to convince your reader that the points you're making are valid and credible and that you are making good points in support of your argument. This is part of ethos, pathos, logos. If you've heard those terms before, again, Latin, it's everywhere with rhetoric and argumentation. Logos is the idea that you are providing information that is factual, and ethos is the idea that you're providing information that's credible from good sources, from experts, and so on. And those are the two most popular ways to try to convince people, marketing aside, which tends to focus more on pathos, which is the manipulation of emotion. And so you'll see that as the background of this idea here, that you want evidence to persuade your reader. So there's many different types of evidence that you can use, and here are some of them. The first one here is one of the most popular, which is what we call facts. And then there are, real facts, which are things that are generally considered to be true and verifiable. So they're objectively true. That's what we would actually call a fact. And then there are other pieces of information that aren't really factual, and people sometimes misname them as facts. So you want to be careful if you're going to say the fact that or the fact is, that you are then reciting something that is factual, that's objectively true and verifiable by multiple sources. Make sure that you choose reliable sources when you are pulling your facts, and again, that has to do with having good information, usually from subject matter experts, and information that is timely to your topic. And the reason why is, for example, in the sciences, things change over time. There's, ways that we talk about subjects and we say this is true and factual, and then we learn new information. We say, oh, it's not really quite that, it's something slightly different. and here's what's really going on. And so, for example, we talk about gravity, and over time, the factual way we talk about gravity from the 1800s to now has changed quite a lot. So you want to make sure that you're talking about information that's still factual as of currently, and that you're not using outdated information that has been proven to be partially or fully inaccurate. So some examples here of some facts. The first one, Harvard was the first college established in the US. It started in 1636, so before the US was even a country. Harvard was here, which is somewhat crazy to think about. So here we have information about a school, we have a date, it's all factual information. And if I look at multiple places on the internet, journal articles, histories, books, I'll find the same information over and over again. It's objectively, verifiably the truth. Another example, 39% of adults in the US have a bachelor's degree. So that is a statistic that we can get, and multiple places have verified, within a couple percentage points. And then the last one, to be a pharmacist, you need a doctorate degree or a PharmD, which requires at least 4 years of post-undergraduate study. And that is just factual information about, say, a program. More types of evidence here. You have research findings, and research findings are the way through which information becomes factual. Usually it has to be studied multiple times, possibly experimented upon before it becomes what we call a fact, and then it becomes a theory, the accepted way that things are, the reason for the way things are done or how things occur. And then eventually, if it's tested enough and it's been accurate for long enough, it becomes a law, like the law of gravity. So research findings we have, could be statistical data, analysis, takeaways, examples, observation, quotes from people participating in the research or the experts who are conducting the research. And an example here, 67% of four-year degree holders felt that college prepared them very well or somewhat well for the workforce. Only 58% of two-year degree holders felt the same way. And so there's no analysis here, there's no takeaway here, like what do you do with this information? This is just statistical facts that were found by the Pew Research Center. And of course you can use examples, which is a broad category. And examples can be real or hypothetical. So hypothetical means it's a made-up situation that you're posing. However, real examples are, of course, more powerful because people can pick apart hypotheticals pretty easily. And you are illustrating or providing an instance of a general idea. Sometimes this takes the shape of a case study where it's a published, notable example of something that is put out there for people to examine and analyze, but it doesn't have to be. And we have an example here. The University of Minnesota was one of the first schools in the US to make the decision to send their students home and resume classes online during the emerging COVID-19 pandemic. And they made that decision in January of 2020, very early. Most other schools were taking their time until late February, mid-March. And so that's a case study of they saw something that allowed them to have extra weeks of time to make a decision and then plan for that decision. Then you have expert testimony. So these are pieces of evidence from or opinions of experts in the field. And again, it shouldn't be Bob down the street. It's got to be a real expert in the field, and they should be considered an expert because they have extensive education and or knowledge and or experience in a field. And you want to choose experts who hopefully are recognized by the field, so people know that they are an expert and that they have good things to say. So my favorite example is Neil deGrasse Tyson, very popular astrophysicist, and he's not doing breaking theoretical work, which he could be doing to expand his field. He's actually focusing on communicating the work of others to general audiences. And so he's an expert, considered an expert in astrophysics, even though he's not doing as much research as other people. He can still communicate his research, whatever he's doing, and more importantly, the research of others to a general audience so that it's understandable. And then, of course, you have people who are credentialed, so people who have educational degrees, people who have licensure, people who have awards, recognition, and they have more credentialing, more visible expertise than others, for example. People who are researchable, meaning you can find them on the internet, so you can go look them up, find out information about them, versus somebody, if you look them up, you have no information about them. That's not great. Not a deal breaker, but it's not great, because then you can't find out more information about who that person is and how they're an expert. And make sure they're actually an expert in that field, so a subject matter expert in that field, because if you're Neil deGrasse Tyson, you're an expert in astrophysics, math, physics, astronomy, but you are not an expert in, Six Sigma manufacturing theory. I'm sure he knows nothing about that. And so someone asking him about that is not useful to people other than to see what he doesn't know. You want to make sure that you're picking experts in the field that you're looking at. And then lastly, that they're as unbiased as possible. Of course, people are going to be biased, that our different life exposures make us biased in different ways, but the people who can communicate the best information have found ways to mitigate that to the least amount of bias as possible. And also, you might see in journal articles in particular, for example, that the experts will indicate in, for example, delimitations, if there's any conflict of interest for them, or possibly at the end of the article if they're being funded by somebody. And so that makes them a little bit biased. They have to acknowledge that. That lets you know that there's a possible conflict of interest, and hopefully that they're mitigating it as best they can. And the information can be, from any published sources, so anywhere you find it. You might summarize or paraphrase them, or you might quote them. Quoting is very popular because then you actually get the voice of the expert, not just the information that they're providing, but they should have a strong, interesting, engaging voice when they're talking about their subject matter that they're experts in. And then here's an example. This is from an article where the World Health Organization said, quote, "While vaccinated people are less likely to be hospitalized because of the disease, this doesn't mean they should drop their guard. They can still get ill from the virus and can still spread it to others." And of course, talking about COVID-19, but also could be the flu. Another type of evidence would be refutation, or refuting a point that the opposing side would make. And so this is tricky because you have to identify a point that the opposing side would make and then have a way to refute that. So you're disproving or countering that opposing viewpoint. And this again includes facts, examples, expert opinions, because you're acknowledging the opposing point and then you have to deal with it and show that it's incorrect or inaccurate by use of facts, examples, expert opinions, so on. So here's an example. Some people think that COVID-19 is only as bad as the annual flu. However, influenza's case fatality rate is typically around 0.3%, while COVID's unvaccinated case fatality rate is about 1%. So acknowledging that some people think one thing or claim one thing, and then here's evidence to prove that that's not the case. All right, so we're going to look at an example argument here pretty quickly. So we have a topic, preventing school gun violence. Sometimes it helps to frame the argument as a question so that when you are putting together thesis statements or topic sentences, you're answering the argument question. So if you phrase it as a question, you've got two options. Should public schools use metal detectors to prevent gun violence? Yes or no. Those are the two main sides that you can pick. And this person has picked yes, that they should use metal detectors to prevent gun violence. And so the thesis statement that they came up with, this would guide an entire essay on this topic. They say public school officials should use metal detectors to screen students for possession of firearms in order to reduce the number of injuries and deaths. And so they have their argument. They should be used. That is the argument. And then here's the very wide angle view of why, to reduce number of injuries and deaths. And then if you're going to argue that, you need to make some paragraphs. And so here's body paragraph number 1. The topic sentence is underlined. The use of metal detectors signals to students that safety measures are in place and that violence will not be tolerated. So using it to prevent violence. And we have a refutation in aqua here. So some oppose the use of metal detectors as a step that fosters a jailhouse atmosphere and condemns students as guilty without cause. So that's the opposing viewpoint. Like, you can't use them because it's going to turn it into a jailhouse atmosphere. However, they're going to refute and say these opponents to metal detectors also decry the economic cost of screening students for possession of firearms. Refuting that, unfortunately, evidence indicates that the need to provide a safe school and the right to a safe school far outweigh these concerns. So safety outweighs the perception of the atmosphere and potential cost. And then in yellow, we have a different type of evidential support here, which is using statistical information from the CDC. So according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, from 1992 to 1999, which is a bit old, by the way, as we're getting on here in time, 56% of homicides and suicides occurring at school involve firearms. On a daily basis, quote, 100,000 students carry guns to school. 160,000 miss classes due to fear of physical harm, and 40 are injured or killed by firearms. So that's shocking, which is sometimes what good evidence does. Shocking that the number is so high. And then there's some explanation here. Though there are millions of school-age children in the US, these numbers are way too high and are preventable through demonstrations of protective policies and practices, such as using metal detectors to screen students. So the last sentence here is a concluding sentence that's wrapping that information back to the main point or topic sentence at the beginning of the paragraph. Here's body paragraph number 2. We have a transition from the first point to the second. Though thousands of children miss school in the US every day due to these fears, their concerns are founded. And we're going to transition to indicating why those fears are founded. So the topic sentence, tragic school shootings have already occurred and signal that the danger is clear and present. For example, in 1999, at Columbine High School in Colorado, 2 students massacred 12 fellow students and a teacher and injured 24 others. In 2005, at Red Lake High School in Minnesota, a student killed 5 students and injured 7 others. More recently, in 2018, so again, starting way back in the past, Columbine was really the first to get this kind of air on the news. So that's the one people talk about the most. But we have a more recent one from 2005, and then one just happened a few years ago in 2018. At Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, gunmen killed 17 people and injured 17. As a result, some, quote, states have passed legislation to allow trained teachers to carry weapons. And so you have here examples of this happening already: Columbine, Red Lake, and Stoneman Douglas, and then a quote from the National Center of Education Statistics. And then the last bit here is explaining and concluding. The effectiveness of such a tactic is still being debated. However, few institutions have the resources to purchase extensive screening devices. These incidents demonstrate that public schools need to enact new policies and procedures, such as using metal detectors at every entrance to screen students for weapons to prevent gun violence in schools. All right, so those are 2 body paragraphs from a student example here, using 3 sources, which they included in their references here. One from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is government. One from National Center for Education Statistics, which is government, and the National Education Association, which is a professional organization around K-12 education. All right, so that is a little bit about argument and how to start picking information to make your points and support your points.